Thanks everybody for joining us here today. Clearly through the process of hiring our assistant coaching staff, there was a lot that went into it as far as, ties to the great state of Texas from a recruiting standpoint, experience at coaching at the highest level, whether it be the National Football League, college football playoff experience, coaching at the highest level. And then clearly there's the developmental piece, having really good coaches that can develop players and build relationships with players. So I think this is a great group of a combination of a group of men that provide that do that for us. So on the offensive side of the ball, our offensive coordinator and offensive line coach is Kyle Flood. Kyle's worked with me the last 4 years, 2 years in Atlanta, 2 years at Alabama. Obviously a former head coach at Rutgers. I think Kyle's got a wealth of experience and knowledge at the offensive line position. I think he's a tremendous recruiter and a great developer of talent, which clearly we saw a year ago at Alabama. So all in all, I think Kyle's a great addition to what we do. He and I work really well hand in hand together and understanding what we're what we're trying to get done offensively. At tight ends is really our assistant head coach and special teams coordinator, as well as tight end coach Jeff Banks. Coach Banks and I worked together the last couple of years at Alabama. Previously, before that, was his time at Texas A&M. Obviously, spent extensive time at A&M. Spent extensive time at University of Texas El Paso. Jeff, his roots in recruiting are really here in the great state of Texas. But he's also, in my opinion, the premier special teams coordinator in the country. So we get a fantastic coach there. We get a fantastic recruiter with ties to the state. At wide receiver, we retained Andre Coleman. I'm excited about Andre. He's somebody that I had actually talked to at my last 2 stops about potentially joining us. I wasn't the final say, so that didn't quite work out. But I've had a prior relationship with Andre over probably the last 3 or 4 years. And the development from the receiver position, the connections he's had in state, even with his time recruiting in state here when he was at Kansas State, I think are all positives for us on that front. And then we also retained Stan Drayton, a little bit of a different title for Stan. He's now going to be our offensive run game coordinator and running back coach. Obviously, Stan has a wealth of experience at a high level, whether it's the National Football League, college football, national championship coach, has developed some of the best runners in the country and has clearly done the same thing since he's been here. So we're excited about that. And then at the quarterback coach position, we added AJ Milway. AJ has been an analyst with me the last 2 years at Alabama. Prior to that, he was a 6-year offensive coordinator at Akron. He's really my right-hand guy, a guy that I worked very closely with the last 2 years. Definitely look forward to him continuing to grow as a young coach, but also being young, he's got a wealth of experience, having had coordinator experience for the previous 6 years. On the defensive side of the ball, we hired Pete Kwiatkowski as our defensive coordinator and outside linebackers coach. Pete, or better known as PK, whichever you guys want to go by at with him. This guy is a tremendous defensive coach. His defenses play fast. They play physical. They're attacking. They're definitely cutting edge. This guy has really been kind of a thorn in my side over about the past decade. Every time we've butted heads with him, whether it was at Boise State or at the University of Washington. I think he's a really good leader of men. I think he does a tremendous job of working from a collaborative effort with the staff that he has, and then developing a game plan from week to week that puts our players in the best position to be successful. So we're definitely excited about that. On the defensive front, we hired Bo Davis as our defensive line coach. As most of you know, Bo had worked here previously under Coach Brown. He's coached at the highest level. He's a national championship coach. He's been here. He's been at Alabama. Most recently, we just hired him from the Detroit Lions in the National Football League. He's a tremendous recruiter. He's a tremendous developer of talent once you get him here, which is important. It's one thing to get players here. It's another to develop them. And probably one of the key components to Bo is he's an unbelievable staff guy. And we talk about building a culture here. I think the presence that he brings on a daily basis is great for the program. In the back end, Terry Joseph is our defensive pass game coordinator and secondary coach. Terry, again, a New Orleans native, has ties to the state of Texas, actually spent some time working in state. Most recently is coming from Notre Dame. I was really impressed, obviously, with our game against Notre Dame and just the way they defended us comparatively to everybody else in the country. And just, I think, a real pro's pro when it comes to recruiting. He has some defensive coordinator in his background at North Carolina. He's got ties to some of the people that we're bringing on staff who he's worked with before. So really excited about Terry. And then working with our safeties is Blake Gideon. All of you well know Blake was a safety here at the University of Texas. His father's a high school coach, a lot of great ties in state from a recruiting standpoint, but also does a really cool job for us of tying us to our rich history and tradition here at Texas. And I just think Blake's got a very bright future in the profession. And he's been super impressive up to this point so far. So excited about that. And then our director of football performance is Tori Bechten. He comes to us from the University of California Bears, a guy who was an assistant for me at the University of Washington, who's really worked his way up. He's been the head strength coach at Cal now for the last 4 years and now is with us. And I think our philosophies are very aligned when it comes to the type of training and regiment that we want our kids to be in during the off season as well as in season to prevent injury, but also to prepare them to play at the highest level for us that way. So all in all, I really love the staff. I love the experience. I love the youth. I love the energy. I love the recruitability factor that they bring. I love the ties to the great state of Texas. And most importantly as well, I love the development piece that they bring for our current roster and the current players that we have now. So with that, I'll open it up to some questions.
Thanks, Coach. Appreciate it. We'll go ahead and start with Dennis De La Pena. And guys, we use the raised hand function and we'll run through some questions.
Hey, Coach, when you're talking about PK Kitkowski, how important is the player development? Why is he so good at turning guys, and they don't necessarily have to have a lot of stars by their name, of turning them into pros?
Well, I think it speaks volumes, one, to the evaluation process, first of all, which, is going to be critical for us. It's not about chasing stars and recruiting for Pete, and it won't be for us. It's about trusting your own evaluation and seeing the upside that young men have and where they can grow. I think the second thing is when you start talking to PK, and when we first started talking, he kept coming back to fundamentals and technique. That is one of his key components to playing great defense, is playing with great fundamentals, playing with great technique, and then ultimately cutting it loose and playing fast and physical. So I think there is a piece to that I like that you recognize that, because he is a firm believer in the fundamentals and techniques that are needed to be a really good football player. And those are daily things that he likes to work on that ultimately show up on game day.
Hey, gang, do us a favor too, and please keep it to one question each. We've got a number of questions, so I want to roll through as many as we can, and we'll go ahead to Chuck.
Excuse me.
Yes, Steve, on the defensive coordinator hire, I mean, obviously the Big 12 is kind of changing a little bit from its reputation of the last decade, but there's a lot of air raid spread influence still in the league. How important was Pete's success against those type offenses out in the Pac-12 in terms of you targeting him?
Well, I think it was important. Clearly, he's had a great deal of success over the years against the air raid or the Mike Leach type systems. Has defended them well every time he's played them. But I think the one thing that working in the Pac-12 provides, there is a variety of offenses that you face throughout the years in that league, whether it was the Oregons when they were going really fast, the Washington States with the air raid, or now USC with the air raid, to the Stanford who lines up in the 2 and 3 tight end sets, So the multiplicity of offenses that you see, I think, has allowed him to grow as a coach to make sure that he has enough multiples on defense to defend all of the variables that you get. Because in reality, when you look around our conference right now, it is a pretty multiple offensive conference. When you go from one extreme at Texas Tech to the other extreme at Iowa State and everybody else in between, I think you have to be multiple. You can't be one dimensional, and it won't be an experiment for him because he's been doing that now for the past 7 to 10 years from a coordinator standpoint.
Anwar Richardson, go ahead.
Hello, Coach. How you doing?
Great.
I'm just kind of good, Coach. Is it different from you when you go from Washington and USC, and do you feel the pressure that you have to maybe bring along those guys that help you get to that position, as opposed to now when you are kind of an OC, you don't have those ties. So is it less pressure? Is that something you learned about how to be able to hire the best and the brightest without having that pressure of bringing other guys along with you?
Well, I just got to a point in this process where my job is to be the best head football coach for the University of Texas that I can be, and to make sure that I'm practicing what I'm preaching, that I'm putting everything in place to put our players in the best position to be successful. So it wasn't necessarily about hiring people that I knew or hiring people that I was close to. It was about trying to assemble the best staff I could hire. Some of those guys have worked with me in the past. Some of them I've competed against. Some of them I didn't know and I had to interview and get to know. But through it all, I'm sitting back and I'm meeting with these guys right now, and I'm just assessing their work, and I'm listening to them talk, and we're getting involved in recruiting. And I'm like, yes, we got it. We really did a great job of putting the jigsaw puzzle together, because forming a staff is it's a really intricate process when you talk about staff culture, when you talk about recruiting, when you talk about player development, when you talk about having, being a leader of men for our players, when you talk about, ties to the university, ties to the state of Texas, there's a lot of integral parts that go into it. And when you can start to slot those spots and hire great coaches that want to be at the University of Texas because they hold this job in such high regard, you feel good about it. Now we've got work to do, but kind of this first step of getting the staff hired has been a good one for us.
Danny, go ahead.
Steve, what made Tori the pick for you at that position, and what should we expect from him this offseason?
Well, I think it was helpful that I knew Tori. Part of the weight room is you want to make sure you're aligned philosophically on two fronts. He deals with our players as much or more than I do, especially during the off season. And the fact that you have somebody there that I've worked with before, that I know can really support our messaging and reiterate our messaging from a weight room standpoint was really big to me. So that was the first component. The second component is really the direction we want to go in our strength and conditioning program, as far as we're a velocity training operation, meaning it's not how much weight our players necessarily can lift. It's how fast can they move the weight. That's what we like to measure. So the game of football is about explosiveness. It's about movement. And that's where we're shifting our focus to. And I knew those core values, Tori's aligned with, and that's what he's been doing now for the past 4 years at Cal. So I think it was just a really good marriage. Our previous history together, I knew the personality that he would bring into the weight room. And then B, the fact of that he is involved in velocity training, which is something that I wanted to make sure we were on the cutting edge with and doing as well. So it was just a good marriage both ways.
Jeff Jones, you're up.
Hey, Coach. The three guys on the offensive side of the ball who came over from Alabama with you, Milway, Flood, and Banks.
Yes, sir.
What is going to be most beneficial about keeping that group together? Is it them knowing your personality, your system, the culture? How will that familiarity benefit us more, or you most?
Well, I think it all helps. I think one, they know my personality and they know my key buzzwords. They know my key coaching points. They know the things that excite me. They know the things that can make me upset. They know, my motivational ways of trying to get to our players and get to our coaches. So for me, one, I have some people already on staff that can build off of where I'm coming from, and that they can help maybe other staff members, especially early on. They can also help the players about maybe just reiterating and conveying a message to them that I'm using. But from a scheme standpoint, from a style of play standpoint, the learning curve is shorter, right? And then they can, clearly being the head coach and putting in an offense, they can spend a lot of that time with Stan and Andre, and then our quality control people, and our GAs, and then ultimately our players. As we're implementing this, it doesn't always have to be one voice. I've got 3 other voices now in the building that know our system, that know our schemes, that are well-versed in them. And I'm very comfortable with them talking to anybody about what we need to get done or what we need to work on. And clearly Kyle's going to take the lead on that as the offensive coordinator. But they're all very well-versed at implementing our schemes.
Kirk Bowles, you're up.
Yeah, Coach, I was curious if you learned anything from your staff you put together at Washington and Southern Cal, and anything you noticed from Nick Saban as far as important things about staff building that you applied in this search.
Well, I think probably the biggest thing I learned from Coach Saban, and it sounds very simple, that, I'm not saying that I did or didn't do at Washington or USC, is hire the best coaches, hire the best people for the job. And it doesn't always have to be a tie to me, somebody I worked with. It doesn't necessarily even have to be a tie to somebody else on staff. If they're really good for the job, if they're really qualified, if they fit the parameters of the things that you're looking for, those are the people you should hire. I'm very extensive in doing my research on the people that we do hire and calling around. That was another trademark of Coach Saban. I mean, he would call a lot of people before he hired a coach. And so I tried to take that same approach as well, to find out as much as I could about a coach on a daily basis. How is he on the recruiting trail, calling high school coaches that I knew that coach had recruited before, and how he engaged in the recruiting process. So there's a lot that goes into it that way, to do our due diligence. And in the end, you have to go with your gut at the end, and you have to say, okay, this guy feels like the right fit. Let's try to hire him.
Chip Brown, you're up.
Sark, how did your old boss Nick Saban handle you taking some of his guys off of that Alabama staff?
Well, I think clearly he recognizes, like I recognize, they're really good coaches, right? And we had a lot of success together. This is a very attractive job, and to come to the University of Texas at this time, at the forefront of something like this, I think was very enticing to these guys to want to come and be part of. And, they made a decision that they wanted to join up and be part of it. And I welcomed them with open arms. It was not something where I went and tried to just recruit a bunch of coaches off the staff. I knew the guys really on the offensive side of the ball very well. Like I said, Kyle Flood and I have worked together now for the previous 4 years in Atlanta and Alabama. And Coach Banks and I actually go way back years from our connection of growing up in California, in Southern California. So all in all, it was more of having a really good working relationship and guys wanting to be here that made it work. And I'm sure Coach Saban, he's going to be okay. He's going to hire some great coaches like he always does.
Chris Tavares, go ahead.
Steve, because you come in without any connections to Texas, you keep a couple of guys from last staff, and you also have guys with past connections like Bo Davis, who coached here under Mac Brown, and Blake Gideon, who played here under him. How important was it to get guys that had connections to not just the state, but the university specifically in this program to help you kind of acclimate and get to know the way things operate at UT?
I think you're spot on. That was a big deal to what we were trying to do. I wanted to make sure we had enough real connections to the program. And so anytime we're able to keep two coaches that were on the previous staff who I have a lot of respect for, I was able to bring in a coach that worked under Coach Brown, really kind of understanding the lay of the land that way. And then to have Blake as an ex-player, 4-year starter, All-American type player that can now come back to his alma mater. I'm really kind of hitting it on 3 different layers, if that makes sense, so that it can broaden my horizon and quickly get me caught up to speed with the lay of the land here to make sure that I'm putting my best foot forward for everybody involved that I come into contact with for the state of the program. And I think that portion of the staff worked out really well for us.
Brian Davis, go ahead.
Hey, Steve, for some of these juniors and seniors that are on the roster, this might be the 3rd position coach they've had in 3 years, right? So do you expect immediate buy-in from the players, or do you think that has to be won or earned?
Well, I think this. I have a saying that I write up on my board everywhere I've been probably for the last 5-6 years. Trust equals time plus consistency. And we have to develop trust, right? From coach to player, player to coach, player to player, coach to coach, all those different relationships. We have to develop trust in our relationships, right? And trust takes time and it takes consistency. So I'm not expecting immediate buy-in. If we get it, that's great. If not, we will get there, all right? We are a relationship-based operation, and that starts with me. It starts with being authentic. It starts with really trying to develop a genuine relationship with our players, not just on the football level, but really getting to know them as people and letting the players understand and having some real life examples of we are there for them on every level to try to put them in the best position to be successful so they can continually build their brand and build the brand of Texas. And again, I just think it's about building quality relationships. And that's what we've said since day one, that's who we are as a staff. We have to now go practice what we preach.
Craig Way, go ahead.
Hey, Sark, kind of a follow-up to what Chris asked you a couple of questions back, but in specific to Blake Gideon, how well did you know him, and how important was it to you in his specific case, not only with his ties and his performance at the university, but in the state of Texas as a Texas high school football player in terms of the overall picture of recruiting and all of that, to have him on your staff?
Well, he'd kind of come across my radar a year ago when I had a couple job opportunities that I ended up not going on. So he'd kind of been on my radar. And then oddly enough, when this job came about and ended up taking this job, it just seemed like a no-brainer. And the quick funny story is, he was working for Lane Kiffin, who Lane and I, know each other pretty well. And I overheard Lane just 2 different times reference Blake about how good of a coach he was and how, what his future, looked like. And so when I got the job, it was like, this is one of the first guys I'm going to get today. And clearly, when you start talking about in-state, the relationships he has with the high school coaches, his father, those things on a recruiting front are just huge. And then the connection to the history and tradition of those other great players that he played with. I think he can be an awesome sounding board for the players on our current roster about how to go about it, what it's like. And, that's a lot of those things are invaluable. You can't get that through experience. You only get it by doing what he's done and where he grew up and coming here to play. So it really just feels kind of like a home run hire for us, and pumped to have him.
Jeff Howe, go ahead.
Hey, Coach, just wanted to know kind of your process right now on roster management when you're dealing with so many different dynamics. You're managing the portal and returning seniors and the eligibility freeze and 2 different recruiting cycles, all of it. Just kind of what's the process right now for you guys in terms of just managing scholarships?
Well, I think, the immediate is recognizing the 8 we have right now. That are coming up here, at the beginning of February, and how we want to allocate those. Every staff is different, right, in what they want their roster management to look like, but from a specific numbers by position. And I think the one thing we have to fight is just to fill numbers. We want to make sure we're taking, the best people and the best players at this point in this juncture of being here. But I do recognize there are some needs to get our numbers kind of a little bit more balanced out for our liking. So clearly you guys probably saw we have the grad transfer, Ray Thornton from LSU coming in at the defensive end spot. Is just something we felt like we needed. Obviously we had an early departure for the NFL draft. We've had some defection from transfers. We've had injuries. So every position is different. I think for us, it'll be probably a combination of taking normal signees here at the beginning of February, maybe taking a guy 2 or 3 out of the portal, and potentially even saving a spot or 2 for down the road, so there is some key components to it. But again, it's more about just making sure we are fitting the needs that we think are prevalent on our roster now based off of the kids we just signed in December, as well as what's on our current roster.
We have 4 final questions in queue. Got time to go through those, and go ahead and start with Joe Cook.
Steve, what was your relation like with AJ while at Alabama, and what appealed to him? What appealed to you about him there, and what will his job look like here at Texas as your quarterback's coach?
Yeah, so AJ and I really worked hand in hand. I mean, he literally was my right-hand guy at Alabama, and I really hadn't known AJ prior to that. But we instantly kind of had that connection that I think some coaches have when they work together. And when we got him on board, it just kind of clicked, and I relied on him quite a bit. And what I like about him is he's kind of the overachiever mentality. He was a walk-on at Alabama, transfers to North Alabama, becomes an All-American quarterback at North Alabama. He starts coaching at junior college football in Mississippi, which is where I started coaching junior college in California. He gets on at Akron with Coach Bowden. A year later, he makes him an offensive coordinator at a young age. For 6 years after that, they get let go. I recruit him. I find out about him. I recruit him to Alabama. We get him. I just like the mentality. I like the guy's drive. I like his focus, but I also like that he thinks like me, because that is really important when we're now going to be working with quarterbacks and I've got head coach responsibilities. I want to make sure I have somebody in that room or in those individual drills that thinks like me, knows how I go about my business, and can relay a lot of those messaging.
Stephen Wagner, you're up.
Hi, Coach. First, I just wanted to confirm that you will call the offensive plays. Is that correct, or is that something that you've thought about yet?
No, yes, I will call the plays. Correct.
So what do you look for in an offensive coordinator whenever you aren't necessarily looking for somebody who you expect to call plays?
Well, I think sometimes we get the word coordinator kind of misplaced with play caller, right? To coordinate is a lot of the daily basis, right? A lot of the prep for practice, a lot of the game planning, in coordinating the staff to make sure that everybody's got their job and their assignments and that they're doing their jobs on a timely fashion. We're presenting ideas. That to me is coordinating, scripting practice. We're coordinating it all. But on game day, I'll be the primary play caller. Clearly, I'm going to lean on Coach Flood and his expertise, just like I have for the last 4 years, right? Especially in the run game and from a protection standpoint, to make sure we're aligned and doing the things that we want to do. So to coordinate is a little different than to play call, right? You're coordinating the week as we prepare for a game or fall practice or spring ball, of making sure everything is coordinated in unison. The staff is all on the same page, so that we're putting our best foot forward for the players.
Anwar, go ahead.
Hey, Coach. Just one more question for me. Let me be the first one to ask you the 600 questions you're going to get about the quarterback competition this year. What does your expert eye tell you about, Hudson Card and Casey Thompson, and what do you want to see from those guys, starting from winter conditioning until spring ball, before you get there?
Well, I think for me is, we're very early in the stage. I've got a chance to watch some tape on both of them. I think they're both really talented players. The key to the drill to me is, one, I just want to make sure they've got good leadership skills at the start here. Two, that they're coachable, right? You want to be coachable early on, because clearly we're going to teach some things that are different than what they were taught before. Not that it's right, not that it's wrong. That's just the way we go about it. So if you've got good leadership qualities, you're coachable, right? Meaning, hey, we're going to ask you to do something maybe a little bit different. Can we get those things done? Can we do transition? Then it'll work itself into the arm talent, the decision-making, right? The accuracy, the ability to make throws under duress. All those things will start to show itself up, but it's going to start with the leadership, which they both possess a lot of. And then we're going to get ourselves into coachability, right? Can they really absorb what we're bringing into them? And then can they go out and start to execute it once we get going? So it's very early. It's probably too early even to say all that, but we've got a long way to go with the position.
Last one, Chip, go ahead.
Sark, what will you have a speed coach in addition to your strength coach, or how do you envision? And I hear in sports science, where are you on sports science? And then, how big of a support staff would you like to have? Obviously, I think you just came from the best support staff in college football.
Well, let me go back on Tori Bechten. He cut his teeth as a strength and conditioning coach at Baylor with the track and field program. So really that is his background, right? His background is in speed training. So I feel good about that portion of what he brings to the table, and definitely dedicated to the sports science side of things. Will be very dialed in, because that's part of this program. We do need to be wired in to sports science and nutrition and all the things that go into it that way. From a support staff standpoint, we definitely buy into the idea that a quality support staff is helpful for the overall organization. All I'm just trying to make sure is anybody we hire in the organization has a real job and a real role in the organization with things to do. I think a lot of times you can hire a lot of people and then it's, well, what do they do? And so we're just going to be very diligent and clean as far as, okay, we're hiring X individual to do what, to make sure he's got a real role in the organization for our success.